Okay. Well, welcome everyone here to this beautiful city of Montreal. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to start with some comments from my friend, Ildefonso, Secretary Guajardo.
Thank
Je
you.
vous en prie.
Thank you, Kirsia. And I see that this time you got a very nice bread box that I'm missing.
I need it more than you.
Well, first of all, good morning to you all. And I want to thank my friend, Minister Freeland, for her hospitality during these 6 rounds of negotiation. And I'm very glad that this sixth time we met in the province of Quebec, and it's in this beautiful city of Montreal. Ambassador Lighthizer, it's a pleasure to see you again. We saw each other in the bus, had a wonderful dinner. And I want to recognize the negotiating teams of the 3 countries for their great effort and their commitment to this process. Members of the press, thank you for joining us today. Good morning to everybody. The road toward the 6th round has not been an easy one. However, reaching to this stage of negotiations allows us to assess some of the main outcomes of the process in its entirety. Let me elaborate on 3 of them. First, NAFTA negotiation remains a high priority in our respective national agendas. This is essential for the process as it gives certainty to our teams as well as our business and financial communities. Second, we are at a much better moment in this negotiation at this point. Progress has been achieved in several areas of the negotiation, especially in those chapters that aim to modernize NAFTA. We are able to close the charter on anti-corruption, which includes strong disciplines that go beyond anything that has been done in prior trade agreements. Charters such as telecommunication, digital trade, and sanitary measures register tremendous progress, and we should be able to get ready to close them in Mexico City. Customs and trade facilitation are also moving swiftly, and the new rules that are binding within this area of customs are crafted much more advanced than the trade facilitation agreement in WTO, and definitely much more stronger than what we achieved in TPP. We also closed the sectoral annex on information and communication technologies, and are close to finishing negotiations on the annexes on chemicals and pharmaceuticals, which are key industries in North America. Third, I can say that NAFTA negotiation triggered an unprecedented interest regarding our agreement. All kinds of stakeholders, business associations, entrepreneurs, farmers, academicians, legislators, and common citizens across North America had stepped in to talk about the advantages and the shortcomings of the original NAFTA agreement. This debate has been key to uphold the relevance of NAFTA and the relevance of regional integration. This is a necessary debate that should go on even beyond we conclude these negotiations to keep the new NAFTA 2.0 strong in the way ahead. We also recognize the efforts put up by Canada in presenting new ideas on some of the most important issues. Thank you for that. And for the next round, we still have substantial challenges to overcome. Yet, the progress made so far put us on the right track to create landing zones to conclude this process. Mexico is committed to intensify our engagement, and we will continue working constructively to solve the pending issues. Mexico will contribute to this process, and we'll be happy to host you in late February in the 7th round of negotiations in Mexico City. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ildefonso. And now I'm going to give the floor to Ambassador Lighthizer. Bob, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Minister Freeland. Thank you for your hospitality.
And I'm challenging Bob to do it in French next time, because he loves the French language, I have learned.
I love the idea of the French language. And Secretary Guajardo, it's great to be here with you too. We appreciate the hospitality. I think we've all gotten to be friends during this process, and I think that's helpful. It is a pleasure to be here in Quebec Montreal is one of the great cities of the world, and I have not been back in many years, and I've missed it. I used to come here in the 70s and 80s with my wife and children to go to Mont Tremblant and learn to ski. We love the French culture. We love the excellent food, the wonderful skiing, and as I recall, it was cold all the time, and that hasn't changed at least. I always thought that Quebec has the greatest motto anywhere. Je me souviens. It's a perfect
I remember.
history and culture, and even the future. I think it is a perceptive motto for a trade negotiator. Maybe we'll put it up at USTR. Je me souviens. Can you see it when you walk in? Since we are in Canada, let me talk a bit about our bilateral trade relationship. I think there is some misunderstanding here that the United States is somehow being unfair in these negotiations, and that is not the case. Free trade agreements are essentially grants of preferential treatment to other countries in exchange for approximately equal grant of preferential treatment in their economy. Thus, it is reasonable from time to time to assess whether the bargain house turned out to be equitable. Using Canadian statistics, Canada sold the United States $298 billion in goods in 2016, the last numbers that we have. We sold Canada $210 billion in goods. Now, that's a lot of two-way trade. But it also means that Canada has an over $87 billion surplus with the United States. To put this in perspective, that figure is equal to approximately 5.7% of Canada's GDP. When energy is removed, and in some people's opinion that's a fair thing to do, the number is still $46 billion. The projected figure for 2017 show that the surplus will be even larger when those numbers are in. Now, I ask Canadians, because we're in Canada, is it not fair for us to wonder whether this imbalance could in part be caused by the rules of NAFTA? Would Canada not ask the same question if the situation were reversed? So we need to modernize and we need to rebalance. Now let me turn to the sixth negotiating round and the status of our talks. We believe that some progress was made. We closed one chapter. As Ildefonso said, it was the chapter on corruption, which is a very important chapter. And we made some progress on a few others. More importantly, though, we finally began to discuss some of the core issues. So this round was a step forward, but we are progressing very slowly. We owe it to our citizens who are operating in a state of uncertainty to move much faster. Of course, negotiating as a group of three is more difficult than bilateral talks. Often issues become more complicated and contentious when there are three parties. I would like to comment on two proposals by the Canadians, one of which has been in the press quite a bit, and that is a presumed compromise on rules of origin. We find that the automobile rules of origin idea that was presented, when analyzed, may actually lead to less regional content that we have now, fewer jobs in the United States, Canada, and likely Mexico. So this is the opposite of what we are trying to do. In another proposal, Canada reserved the right to treat the United States and Mexico even worse than other countries if they enter into future agreements. Those other countries may, in fact, even include China if there's an agreement between China and the United States. This proposal, I think, if the United States had made it, would be dubbed a poison pill. We did not make it, though. Obviously, this is unacceptable to us, and my guess is it is to the Mexican side also. Finally, I would like to refer, because I think it fits in this context, to an unprecedented trade action that Canada brought against the United States very recently. It constitutes a massive attack on all of our trade laws. If it were successful, it would lead to more Chinese imports into the United States and likely fewer Canadian goods being sold in our market. Now, we understand that countries often challenge specific actions taken by another country in the context of trade laws. This is normal and what we expect. But this litigation essentially claims that 24 years ago, the United States effectively gave away its entire trade regime in the Uruguay round. Of course, we view this case as frivolous, but it does make one wonder if all parties are truly committed to mutually beneficial trade. It also underscores why so many of us are concerned about binding dispute arbitration. What sovereign nation would trust to arbitrators or to the flip of a coin their entire defense against unfair trade? To conclude, some real headway was made here today. The United States views NAFTA as a very important agreement. We're committed to moving forward. I am hopeful progress will accelerate soon. We'll work very hard between now and the beginning of the next round, and we hope for major breakthroughs during that period. We will engage both Mexico and Canada urgently, and we will go where these negotiations take us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Bonjour. Je tiens à souligner.
Hello. I'd like to highlight the fact that we're here today on the traditional land used as a meeting place by Indigenous peoples, notably the Abenaki and the St. Lawrence Iroquois, the Wendat Huron, and the Mohawk Nation.
I'm very happy to welcome all of you to Montreal, to everyone who's participated in this 6th round of negotiations, and in particular our dedicated negotiators. Thank you very much.
From the beginning of the process last August, the efforts of our negotiators have surpassed expectations. They've spent many weeks far away from their families and home. Long weeks with long days.
From all three countries. I think all three of us are united in being grateful for your continuing hard work. And that work, I'm pleased to say, is beginning to bear fruit. To my Mexican and American counterparts, Ambassador Lighthizer, Secretary Guajardo, I extend a warm welcome to one of my favorite places in the world and one of Canada's greatest cities. Montréal est un endroit idéal.
Montreal is an ideal place for these discussions. In fact, its location on the St. Lawrence is a place that has been a traditional site of trade and prosperity for hundreds of years. The fur trade, which was critical in the first years of Canada's existence, spread to our whole continent from here. Since the time of the fur traders, Montreal has evolved to become a dynamic hub in industry and finance, a giant in the cultural sector that has trade ties all over the world. However, one thing hasn't changed: the most basic aspect of trade.
Whether it's in hockey cards or the latest automobile software, it must be an exchange that benefits both parties. Or in the case of the trilateral exchange, all parties. This may be the oldest rule of human interaction, and it is the essence of free and fair trade. In Davos last week, where all three of us were, President Trump said this: "We support free trade, but it needs to be fair and it needs to be reciprocal, because in the end, unfair trade undermines us all." Canada agrees with that sentiment. C'est pourquoi
That is why we are pleased with the progress that has been achieved here this week. In order to close a third chapter on anti-corruption and to begin constructive dialogue to to look at a number of fundamental issues for these negotiations.
That Canadians do not view trade as a zero-sum game, in which one side must lose in order for the other to win. We have also said from the outset, last August, that we believe NAFTA must be updated and improved, and that the benefits of trade must flow more broadly to more people in order for that trade to be sustainable. Now, Canada does not consider trade deficits and surpluses to be the ultimate arbiter of whether trade is good or bad. But it is worth noting that in overall trade, including goods and services, Canada had a trade deficit with the United States of nearly $8 billion in 2016, out of total bilateral trade worth $634.8 billion. That's close to balance, but it's a small deficit for Canada. In manufactured goods, our trade deficit with the United States is $35.9 billion on total trade in this sector of $440.4 billion. And let me say, these aren't Canadian numbers. They are from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis in the Department of Commerce. We are the largest export market for 2/3 of U.S. states. In fact, the U.S. sells more to Canada than to Japan, China, and the U.K. combined. There is one sector where Canada does have a significant surplus with the United States, and that is in energy. There, the U.S. has a $37 billion trade deficit with Canada. But those Canadian energy exports are helpful to the American economy, and they crucially support U.S. energy security. My point is that when trade is free and fair, there are reciprocal benefits. Our energy exporters benefit tremendously from cross-border trade, just as U.S. manufacturers benefit from selling their products to Canadians. Permettez-moi de le mentionner de nouveau.
Allow me to reiterate, NAFTA is not perfect. This agreement is 24 years old. It must evolve. It must be improved. That is what we are seeking through our current efforts. What is in play is not only that our three countries together have created the largest free trade zone in the world. It's a regional market of $21 billion with 480 million consumers, nearly 30% of the world's GDP, with only 7% of its population.
Negotiations, preserving the nearly 9 million U.S. jobs that depend on trade and investment with Canada, and the 5 million U.S. jobs that rely on trade with Mexico, and the 2 million jobs here in Canada that are linked to our cross-border exports. And it's about recognizing that the employment rate today in Canada and the United States is among the strongest rates in recent memories. The U.S. stock market, as reflected by the Dow Jones Industrial Average, has reached historic highs. These are not the signs of an economic system that is broken. From Canada's perspective, our job here is to build on what we do that is working well, while updating and modernizing as needed, to foster conditions for growth that benefits Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans. Our job is not to cause the dismantling of the cross-border supply chains that have made our auto industry the envy of the world. Our job is not to weaken North American competitiveness, it is to strengthen it. That's why Canada came to the table in Montreal with creative ideas we believed could move us forward on some of the unconventional U.S. proposals that were broached in round 4. Let me be clear about this. These U.S. proposals are unprecedented and in some ways represent an approach quite different from any Canada has encountered before as a trading nation. Cependant, au Canada,
However, in Canada, we are always looking for innovative compromises that are mutually beneficial. Our negotiators have worked tirelessly to find regional approaches and non-conventional proposals in the hopes of entering into dialogue and finding the path forward. This conversation has begun.
to update NAFTA's rules of origin for autos in ways that would draw new investment to the North American industry, fostering value-added R&D jobs, next-generation autonomous and electric cars, and North American steel and aluminum production. Industry on both sides of the border has welcomed this approach. It includes creative thinking about how to introduce a rigorous, meaningful, 5-year review process to ensure NAFTA is working well for all partners and adapting to technological change. And it includes a new approach to investor-state dispute settlement, NAFTA's Chapter 11, that responds directly to U.S. concerns about being subject to ISDS. This, as well as the completion of the anti-corruption chapter, builds on the progress made in previous rounds, during which we closed chapters on competition and small and medium-sized enterprises. Additionally, we made good progress here in the talks on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, telecommunications, customs and trade facilitation, and technical barriers to trade. As for softwood lumber, to which Ambassador Lighthizer alluded, Canada considers this to be on a separate track from NAFTA. Canadians are familiar for many decades with softwood lumber as a trade irritant between our countries. As we've said all along, our preference is a negotiated settlement, and we're ready to talk at any time. In the meantime, as any country would do, we are defending our industry and our workers to the best of our ability. Pour revenir à l'ALENA, nous...
To get back to NAFTA, we are on the brink of closing a number of other chapters during round 7 in Mexico City, including fundamental chapters for North American industry. All of these accomplishments are a step in the right direction.
Its overarching objective, as it has been from the beginning of this process, is an updated, modernized NAFTA that creates broader opportunity for the middle class and those working hard to join the middle class in all three of our great countries. Our goal, and I think it is our shared goal, is a new and improved NAFTA that is a win-win-win. I look forward to continuing this work in Mexico City late next month, and after that in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Merci. Muchas gracias.